Hi all. This one is called Aliens Are Us, and it starts off with my definition of an alien, which is any soul whose primary development is more than 51% in higher frequency dimensions and less than 49% in the third dimension. For me personally, it wasn't until I was about age 40 in 1993 that I experienced a shift in my energies and started feeling more alien, i.e. more comfortable in other dimensions than the Earth plane. Up until then, my development felt almost perfectly balanced, 50-50 between development in this plane and sojourns in other dimensions. And while I would say that I had a preference for sojourns in the Earth plane before this time, age 40, after this, while I still have a great fondness for the Earth, I no longer seem to feel any preferences between dimensions. The feeling of non-preference was certainly reinforced ever since my soulmate, Jim Rush, passed over in '97 at the age of 60. I was 44 at that time. Since then, his ongoing communion with me and the occasional quote-unquote trips or quote-unquote waking dreams or lucid dreams where he takes me on to other dimensions continues to loosen any vestiges of attachment to being in any particular plane of consciousness. But for whatever the reason, being a trance channel in this life since 1972 and feeling more grounded and stable from Taoist practices, or the reason of the galactic forces bombarding the plane to shift us all more towards the light, which I call the quickening, or probably all of the above, I began to feel definitively as if I was more comfortable and more aware of being in other dimensions while simultaneously being present in this body in this incarnation. In other words, my expanded concept of identity shifted its perspective to the point that it became viscerally integrated into my being. Over time, my desire to paint began to fall away, and my creative focus shifted to writing books, articles, newsletters, and teaching workshops from this expanded concept of self-perspective. And I still keep half of the portraits in my office focused in this dimension and half focused from other dimensions to make all my clients feel at home. And most of the images in my slideshow for this particular article are self-portraits in what I call alternate realities. This shift in me marked a midpoint in my journey from coming in for a landing in this incarnation, right in the middle of my Uranian opposition cycle, by the way, to an awareness that I am now on the return ticket portion of this ride. What does it all mean? If you feel relief when you read my definition of aliens and can identify with not feeling at home or comfortable with your emotions, bodies, or in the Earth plane itself, welcome to the 10% and growing all the time of souls incarnate in the Earth plane whose primary development is in other dimensions. The comedy movie Men in Black addressed this theme with the premise that all aliens were delegated to stay on the island of Manhattan and maintain a human disguise. When I saw this movie, I wanted to yell at the screen, quote, "They've all been confined to the East Village of Manhattan," unquote. And yes, it's true. The neighborhood I live in has a disproportionate number of alien residents, literally, and I don't just mean from across the pond or other countries. On any Saturday summer night when I'm people watching from a sidewalk cafe, there are so many aliens, even with their alien pets, promenading up and down the main drag, St. Mark's Place, and not at all in disguise, that it literally looks like a real-life version of the intergalactic cocktail bar in the original Star Wars movie. On a slightly more serious note, what do I have to say about the clients who come to me because they believe they've had alien sightings, alien implants, or been abducted by aliens, etc.? Well, this is what I have to say, quote, "I work with anyone who comes to me in a way that is empowering to them to make the most of their experiences. I don't argue, debate, or dispute, but rather create a bridge reality so that we can work in a positive way going forward with whatever history, beliefs, or fears they bring to me. Just as in medicine, the placebo effect has been proven to be effective as a treatment, equally as much as drugs, over 30% of the time, I believe in the power of the mind to create our personal realities, perspective, and experiences. Therefore, while I have not personally had some of the experience my clients bring me to resolve, I do not discount them, but rather choose to work with them in the most helpful way so that they can use their experiences as soul lessons for karmic healing. I call myself a quote-unquote full-service psychic. This means that I've had people come to me who believe they've been possessed by demons, discarnate entities, ghosts, aliens, or whatever. My method of working with these types of clients is to empower them to recognize that, at a higher level of their being, they've chosen this experience and personal reality for very specific karmic lessons which I can help them to own and integrate. The vast majority of clients who believe that they have been taken over or possessed in some way are usually holding some very limiting karmic fear-based beliefs in which they think they're powerless over more powerful and usually dark, quote-unquote, outside forces, and thus feel as if they can't protect themselves energetically. As Edgar Cayce, the great sleeping prophet of the 20th century, said, quote-unquote, mind is the builder, and if we don't believe something is possible for us, we can't manifest it. For a more detailed explanation of this type of projection, I wrote an article on this called Owning Our Inner Pluto Before It Eats Us for Lunch. While I do not allow anyone to breach my psychic boundaries and feel strong and confident in maintaining them, it has taken me much work over many decades to get here. Therefore, I empathize with anyone who does not believe it's possible to have this power within their own being. This is the very reason that I've chosen to pass on my own personal psychic empowerment practices. And for more on this, there's a link to my empowerment practices in my services menu. Ultimately, my philosophy is that there is one being with billions of faces. And this metaphysical perspective encompasses not only the horizontal axis of the earth plane, but also the vertical channel to higher dimensions as well. This means that at the level approaching absolute reality, there are no horizontal boundaries that separate all souls incarnate on the planet in terms of the co-creative divine energies we're all made up of. And vertically, there's nothing that separates us from beings in other dimensions. We're also all made up of the same divine stuff. Once we dissolve the illusionary boundaries between ourselves and others, horizontally and vertically, at the level of relative truth in this plane of duality, and once we get a taste of how it is to be in all spaces and times simultaneously through spiritual practices, then this multi-dimensional game we're all playing and becomes much more cozy and much more fun. Aliens are us indeed. For almost 40 years, this is the backstory, I've been painting portraits of beings in what I call quote-unquote alternate realities. In 1982, at the first solo show of my work, in Soho, New York City, entitled Visions and Dreamworks, I had a small back room filled with figurative portraits from this reality and a large main gallery room filled with over a dozen portraits of what the mass consciousness would call aliens or ETs. One of the more humorous aspects of this show, for me anyway, was that while I had been stoned on grass when I painted all the figurative portraits, most of the alternate reality portraits had been done once I'd cleaned up my act and was clean and sober in recovery. Most everyone at the opening thought for sure it was the other way around. But the real joke was yet to come. At the opening, as I was standing in the center of the main room, someone asked me, "Where did you get the idea for all these aliens?" Before I answered, I did a 360-degree scan of all the portraits. That's when, as if I'd been struck by lightning, I realized undeniably, quote-unquote, they're all me! Exclamation point. To view my portraits, no mood-altering substances required. You can go on my website to the gallery of multidimensional delights and see some of them in the slideshow with this audio version. Since 1972, I've been channeling readings from a variety of sources as I expanded the range of what my channels called, quote-unquote, my open channel system. Most of the soul readings I did for others evolved from an original contact in the Akashic Hall of Records, who initially called himself the Sympathetic Bridge Recorder. Then, over time, this Akashic contact merged with a group of or gestalt of souls whose function was to maintain and monitor The soul records at the level of the sixth dimension of consciousness in the Taoist system, also known as the causal plane, or the galactic plane. Sorry, not the galactic. That's the seventh plane. And the void is the eighth. The sixth is also known as the collective unconscious, or the cosmic ocean of consciousness, one level up from the individual soul level. So it contains the soul records of all souls. As the causal plane, or the cosmic ocean, is the plane from which souls are born. There were numerous other channels that came through in the early years. Some seem much further out in frequency and tone than the ones I used with clients, and originally labeled themselves quote-unquote from the other side of the universe. Then over time, these channels stabilized and began calling themselves the highest available galactic forces. The acronym I use is HAGF, HAGF. This channel, whom I call my bosses, is the one I still use for my own readings, as they direct me in my personal marching orders. HAGF is also the channel I use for readings of a planetary, global, or galactic perspective, as well as setting the theme and tone for most of my newsletters these days. Just about the time I had the revelation about the true identity of my altered state or alien portraits, the revelation that they were all self-portraits, my channels informed me that in no uncertain terms that they, meaning all of my channels, were, quote-unquote, all me all along. The various channels that had just been labeling themselves for my convenience for over a decade, and so as to not put me into shock by giving me more information than I was ready to handle. So it seems it took over a decade of being a trance channel for my little self, or ego personality, to be stable and right-sized, enough to handle this concept of expanded identity. And I'm still working on it. For a more detailed description of this process, there's details on this in my first book, Openings, A Guide to Psychic Living in the Real World, in Part 5, the personal development of this channel system, and Part 6, Channels of Influence. In summation, about 10% or so of the people who come to me for soul readings are informed that their primary development is predominantly, meaning at least 51%, in other dimensions, and are thus defined as aliens in terms of what dimension they would be most comfortable phoning home to. The hallmarks of alien development are feeling, quote, quite uncomfortable with the human emotional range, resistance to being fully embodied, and or being at home in the density of the earth plane at all. Resistance to being at home in the earth plane at all. The vast majority of clients who receive the news that their primary development is alien are incredibly relieved, and many are not even very surprised at all, as their reading just confirmed what they, at least subliminally, already knew. And learning that their spouses and children were many times of alien development as well made it feel very right and cozy for them, even if they were advised to not necessarily share this info with their loved ones. I also began working with quite a few of these alien souls in my psychic therapy process, with a special focus on helping them, quote-unquote, come in for a landing in terms of releasing any limiting karmic or alien beliefs, fears, or aversions that kept them from fully embracing their assignment for this incarnation. This usually, usually entailed rounding out their soul development through a cycle of lives of full immersion in the earth plane and full development of the range of humanness through different roles and scenarios, with a special focus on experiencing the human emotional repertoire and how to operate in a physical body in 3D. These 10% are also the therapy clients who give themselves the green light to go further out into higher frequency dimensions than the causal plane as part of their work with me. Most clients choose to stabilize at the 6th dimension or causal plane, which I also call the universal flow state or the cosmic ocean of consciousness, as the optimal frequency to maintain if they want to be able to simultaneously function in the earth plane. The causal plane is also where one can learn how to access the Akashic records and channel readings for themselves and others. For most clients, I concur that going further out than the 6th dimension is not optimal for stabilization while in a 3D incarnation. But for those souls with alien development going further out and stabilizing in their seventh dimension functions and frequencies, which I call the galactic plane, while opening up the space-time continuum so they can experience being here and there simultaneously, is not just the culmination of their therapy with me, but the ultimate joy for them and for me. And there's some links at the end. Psychic therapy, the backstory, Leela, Divine Play, and my memoir, Psychic Adventures in This Dimension and Others, entitled Cosmic Sugar. Hope you enjoy.